Hello, this is Tyrell Cannon from the Chicago Alternative Comics Expo, or CAKE. CAKE is a weekend-long celebration of independent comics inspired by Chicago's rich legacy as home to many of underground and alternative comics' most talented artists, past, present, and future. Featuring comics for sale, workshops, exhibitions, panel discussions, and more, CAKE is dedicated to fostering community and dialogue amongst independent artists, small presses, publishers, and readers. This series of digital programs is called CAKEPOPS, check-ins with CAKE creators about topics of interest to the comics community. Please like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our future programs. For this edition of CAKEPOPS, we are joined by artist Jim Terry. Jim Terry grew up in the Chicago suburbs. His mother was Native American from the Ho-Chunk Nation of Wisconsin, and his father was an Irish-American jazz musician. Jim is a prolific and accomplished comic book artist who has worked on such comics as The Crow, Skinning the Wolves, Sundowners, Alice Cooper vs. Chaos, and Vampirella. Most recently, Jim's memoir comic titled Come Home, Indio was released by Street Noise Books. A Native American cartoonist explores the isolation and anxiety of being lost between two worlds, but ultimately becoming comfortable in his own skin. This powerful graphic novel shares the author's journey of discovering his spiritual home as a Native American, from a childhood in suburbia disconnected from his identity as an indigenous person, through an urban adulthood marked by a struggle with alcoholism and the death of his parents, to his life-altering experience at Standing Rock. He begins to find a new sense of self as a Native and as an American. I recently was able to sit down and draw with Jim for a while and have a great discussion. We discussed everything from his new book to his past comics work and different life experiences that he's had. It was a really awesome discussion, and I hope that you'll join us. So how long have you been making comics? And I don't mean like I've been making comics since I was 12, right? But I haven't been like making comics that are printed up and bound and put into stores. Like, how long have you been doing that?
Yeah, let me see. I want to say 08 or 09.
Okay.
Was Skinning the Wolves.
Okay.
And that was my first pro book. But by the time I had done that, I had self-published like 12 of my own.
Nice.
I was doing them at showing them at the cons and such.
And were you just doing like the old school Kinko's black and white thing, or were you working with like a printer, or what were you doing?
Well, the first time I ever tried it was, I want to say 01 or 02.
Okay.
And at that time there was no Comics Press, any of that. So I had to go to an actual printer. And man, that was a nightmare. I talk about this stuff and then it's like, well, geez, I mean, I've done miserable stuff before. Yeah. I could do a Kickstarter.
Right.
I mean, they didn't know, they'd never done a comic before, and the paper was weird, all that stuff.
Yeah. And comics themselves are so niche that getting, like, I've worked with some local printers sometimes just because, I like the idea of working with a local printer to do something, but then you do run the risk of them just not having a clue what you're doing,
Yeah. So that was in the early 2000s, and shortly after that, I did 3 issues like that, and then Comics Press came out. Actually, I think it was Comics Press was the first one, and then Kaboom came out.
Kaboom, yeah.
And I worked with both of those guys, and I think Comics Press went under.
How did you get hooked up on that first gig? That wasn't the one. Wait, that's not what your Crow book is called, is it?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Wolves, I couldn't remember what the title was. So it was just meeting James, huh, and like hanging out.
Well, it was me putting a 10 or 15 page Xerox of pages on his table at a convention, because I really admired the almost homemade quality of the Crow.
Yeah.
And I thought it was about as daring, maybe not storytelling wise, but artistically.
Yeah.
And storytelling, it was pretty daring as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I really loved it, and I thought maybe this guy will get what I'm trying to do here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I gave it to him, and in the meanwhile, it took 4 years, but he got back to me.
I know, I read that and I was like, 4 years, man. You're probably like, wait, did I talk to him? You know?
Yeah, and the thing was, a lot had happened in that 4 years. That's when I got sober, and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but I kept drawing the entire time. I wasn't sober when I put the pages on his table, and he likes to remind me of that. But I mean, I literally wasn't sober when I put the table.
Oh man. Yeah.
But I got sober, but I still kept drawing, and I still kept with the story. And he just sent me an email, and I said, I like the pages you gave me, and there, that was it. We started talking movies. He's a big movie buff,
right?
And talking artists, because we both love a lot of the same people, and we just became friends.
That's kind of ideal, right? I mean, then when you're, not only is it a gig, but it's like with someone you respect and someone you get along with. That's huge.
Well, yeah, it was pretty great. And then after a couple of years of, I'd go down to Dallas and do shows with him and just hang out. And after a while, he was like, I think you're ready to do an actual book. If you want to do a Crow book, I got to doing this thing with IDW, and I was like, I was terrified, but it turned out to be the easiest and most free project I've worked on, because he gave me an outline and he said, just make something good.
That's awesome, dude.
And
to have that kind of trust, that's really cool.
Yeah, I think his actual turn of phrase was do the touch of evil thing. Take a pulpy story and make it great.
That's kind of like the best stuff. And in movies especially, man, just give me pulp and make it like well done.
Yeah. So our model was the EC War Comics. We were trying to do something that would fit in with that, the Harvey Kurtzman stuff. Because that was our favorite. That's my favorite too.
Yeah, I see a lot of Kurtzman in your work. I feel like
really,
I see Kurtzman. I see Eisner a lot.
Yeah, he's
especially in like the stuff in Come Home Indio.
Yeah.
There's like so much expressive brushwork that you have going on in there, or brushwork. I guess you said you did a lot of it digitally, but it's like this way of drawing that I don't think is very mainstream right now. It's very it feels of a different time, but which is weird because it's like Will Eisner's style is like encompasses so much of what comics are. Like it's like he's almost one of the most pure comics artists, in my opinion. There's not a lot of just flash. Like some comic artists, I feel like they feel more like illustrators that are making comics, and some are more like cartooning for like strips. And his stuff is somewhere in between there for me.
Yeah, well, I'm a huge admirer of his, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually reread New York before I started working on Indio, just to get that vibe.
Mm-hmm.
Because that was a life changer of a book for me.
When did you first read it?
I was probably 33.
Wow.
So I was a late comer to that.
Mm-hmm.
But it was like it was waiting for the perfect time to introduce itself to me.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was able to appreciate it in a way that I wouldn't have when I was only looking at Bernie Wrightson or these more draftsman type guys.
Right. Yeah, I think when I first was exposed to his work, I didn't have an appreciation for it either. I feel like I thought it was too maybe cartoony or too like I love the way he integrates his words, but I was so used to seeing them as like two separate entities,
Yeah.
even though to me, like, the best comic artists are the ones who do everything themselves, really. I mean, that's the true sort of ideal for me when I think about what it means to draw comics. So, I don't know, I'm kind of shifting gears all the time, but I was reading Come Home Indio, and I was thinking, like, a lot of the stuff going on in the book is just things that have been in my brain lately, thinking about, like, you know, now that I have a kid, but just thinking about how things are passed down, not just through, like, behaviors, but through social things and through genetics and through, and, like, this whole idea of a continuum of life through, I mean, through all of creation, I guess, but, like, you know, specifically through a bloodline or through a family is insane to me. Like, was that, when you started the book, were you thinking about that kind of stuff, or is that something that came out through doing the work?
Yeah, it was definitely, I didn't have a grand scheme. In fact, I was probably about 50 or 60 pages into it before I started realizing that there was a theme. And that was jumping forward as well. You know, I had to take a break. I had to, when I jumped around a little bit, most of it was straight through. But now that I'm thinking about it, I did jump around when I was telling the Chicago stuff, when I was hitting that bottom.
Mm-hmm.
It was too much for me, you know. So I would go back and look at the kids' stuff and try and think if there's any other stories, and do a page of that. And but after a while, I was like, gosh, you know, I don't really feel like I fit in most of this book, and that's kind of what keeps happening over and over and over, is not really feeling like I fit in.
Yeah.
Almost like it's a theme.
Yeah.
And so I had no grand idea other than to get to the point where I went to Standing Rock, which was the whole reason that they wanted me to do it.
Okay.
And I was super uncomfortable with that.
Right.
You know, but
they wanted it because of what was happening at Standing Rock, or because they knew you went, or both?
Because the weird thing, the whole thing is that this publisher, Liz, over at Street Noise,
mm-hmm.
a very socially conscious publishing house.
Okay.
And the whole idea of it, this is not something I would have done on my own.
Well, that was the other thing I was going to ask, is like, is this your idea, or, I mean...
No, and here's the weird thing. This is what comes back to Malik, is I was watching Tree of Life,
mm-hmm.
and I was just watching it by myself and experiencing it again, and I was so inspired by it that it brought up memories of my own childhood. And, you know, my dad was a tough guy, you know, and I started remembering that, you know, there's a lot of discomfort in that movie. And there's a lot of bullying by his dad, you know, by their dad.
Mm-hmm.
And I remembered it, and it was like a shock to remember that stuff. And I sketched some of it out. I sketched out like a 1-page, 2-panel drawing of when he set up a boxing ring in our front yard. And we had boxing gloves, and my friend Morrow came by just to hang out. And my dad made us box each other. And I was, you know, I was at that point of being pushed around and angry and all that I hit Morrow as hard as I could. And he had no idea that, you know, he thought we were just messing around. Right. And I had to kill him. I had to. You know? and it just, that movie unearthed that memory, and I was like, God, I gotta draw this. And so I did, and that was one of the things that she had seen. This publisher had seen that and thought that more of that would be good, as well as the fact that I had been to Standing Rock.
Gotcha.
And she was like, do you want to do a story about Standing Rock? And I was like, nope. But she told me what kind of thing she was trying to do with this company.
Okay.
And give voice to marginalized people.
Right.
And I was at a show. I was at the Indigenous.
Oh yeah,
Indigenous Pop.
in Arizona or New Mexico.
Yeah, this one was in Denver.
Oh, okay.
And I was with a bunch of natives there, and I was like, look, this publisher, and as you know from reading the book, I've always had a little imposter syndrome issue. And I talked to these incredible creatives, and I was like, they want me to tell my story, and I don't know if it's worth telling. And they're like, there aren't enough of our stories out there. You better tell it. And I was like, okay, I guess I'm going to do this thing. But, I was only at Standing Rock for like, I don't know, 7 days total, something around there.
Yeah.
So I didn't feel like I should just talk about that.
Yeah, if it had just been about that, that would have been really weird, right?
Yeah, that would have been unfair to everybody involved. So I was like, well, I mean, Standing Rock was important to me in a very specific way. I should just talk about that. But in order to do that, I have to talk about why it's important to me and what led up to it.
Well, and that's interesting because like when I was reading the book, I was very struck by that. Like, I mean, it was like, I mean, that's the ending of the book, really, right? I mean, there's a little denouement, right? But the ending of the book is at Standing Rock, and you definitely switch your style of storytelling at that part. You go with more of a prose sort of way of doing it, and it was interesting because there was so much of the book that was done in traditional comics kind of style, panel-to-panel storytelling, thought balloons. Oh man, I never see thought balloons anymore. I never use them. And I was like, I need to use thought balloons. These are so great. These are so great. Because you would have your voice now looking back in your your narration, but then you'd have your internal thoughts from the time in the thought balloon. And just that device alone is just so great.
It was fun to use that.
Yeah. But anyway, I was just thinking about how it gets to that point, and then it really is like, I guess it's fresher, right? It's new. That's the most recent thing that's happened, right? Or one of the more recent things that's happened in your life. But it felt like too you were no longer talking about just yourself. You were talking about what was happening there. Whereas the rest of the book is definitely about you and about your, all the things you've gone through in your life. And I'm not saying it was bad or anything. I'm just saying it you made a stylistic change there, and for me it fit. And there was some things that were hammered home in those moments that were really nice. I mean, no spoilers or anything for anyone listening, but it's like very interesting to see you tie some threads together there. And again, I mean, I always wondered, like, I don't do a lot of personal work. I mean, I do, I guess, but not to, I can't imagine doing a memoir, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But like, I was just curious about how much of that, like I was saying before, was discovery and how much of it, and it sounds like you kind of just started the book. You didn't really outline the whole thing. You just sort of...
No, I didn't outline it. And it had always been my intention to do a more prose when it got to going to Standing Rock, because as I say in the book, I am in no way an ambassador of that situation, and I didn't feel qualified to talk about it. But and I certainly did not want to illustrate it in a cartoony way.
Exactly.
That was the last thing I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And so I thought that, okay, I'm going to take a chance and do this in a completely different style, just because, well, for one, we also, at this point, we know that it's a different thing than what I've been talking about up to then. So I was just kind of trusting the reader to stick with me. And originally I'd typewritten these stories out, and but it was so cold that and so jarring of a change that I was like, no, I have to handwrite this like the rest of it.
What's your process like when you're working on? I'm sure it's different, but I guess for this one specifically, what was your process? Were you writing scripts for the pages? Were you just drawing and writing as you went? Like how did you go from page to page, and how far ahead were you working?
Well, initially I tackled it as I would any other book, where I do thumbnails and I kind of do the scripting in the thumbnails.
Okay.
I usually break down a page and then I just write all the dialogue in numbered balloons beside the sketch.
Okay.
And then so it's like many times processed. So by the time it gets to the page, then I start penciling and doing the lettering and the art. So sometimes the lettering, the words change to fit the art.
Yeah.
Not just situationally, but compositionally.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, this is too many words.
Yep.
So I initially started it that way, traditionally, and I did about 4 pages that way. And when I sent them, they're like, okay, do you think that this should happen, or do you need to, make this change? And I was like, oh my God. There's no way I'm digging into the depths of my soul, drawing it, and then having them edit it, and then me have to redo it.
Right.
So I decided after about 4, maybe I did about 6 or 7 pages traditionally. I was like, the only way I'm going to get this done on time and with my sanity is if I do it digitally.
So I did notice, like, so there is how many pages that are probably done more in the traditional in that? Is there any that made it to the final?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There's I mean, I could point them out to you, but there's probably 5 or 6 that
I'm gonna show you one and see if I'm right.
Okay.
It's just 5 or 6. I probably won't get it right. Yeah, it's really amazing. I was impressed also with how much, again, this is maybe an old school way of making comics, in that you convey a lot on every page. Like, it doesn't feel like there's any wasted space, like everything is so incredibly dense as far as like the amount of time or information covered, which is great.
Yeah.
I love that. It's like when you read old X-Men comics, like by Byrne or Claremont or whoever, and you're like, holy crap, like so much has happened in this issue. And you read like a modern issue, and it's not necessarily good or bad, but like nothing happens for 20 pages. You got like 3 or 4 plot points and that's it.
Yeah. Well, those are the ones I grew up reading.
That makes sense.
And that's and one of the things that was a conscious decision.
Traditional?
That's traditional. Yeah.
Cool.
One of the things I made a conscious decision of was to stick with a very basic format.
Oh, okay.
Because, they're like, should this be more dramatic, and should we maybe do some inset panels? And my whole thing was like, not everybody reads comics.
Right.
And, if I'm trying to reach people who don't just read comics, telling it in the most basic way possible is so that made it easier for me also. Because then I had a framework that I had to stick in, and occasionally put in a 5 panels, or break up the page with 2 panels. But for the most part, it was a 6-panel breakdown.
I think setting some rules on a project is usually a good move, because there's already so much you're thinking about. If you can say, okay, I'm only going to use X, Y, and Z techniques for certain things. Obviously, you can break those rules, but it's that whole thing of like Watchmen, right?
Yeah.
Use this thing, and then when you deviate from it, there's much more of a impact. It has a little more of an impact.
Absolutely. So, I forgot what we were talking about.
I don't know either. I mean, I guess your process in general, and like how you put it together. And I mean, I was interested to hear about the editing. You touched on that a little bit. It sounds like, because I can't imagine trying to edit someone's memoir. Like, what do you do? Like, well, that part doesn't, can you live your life differently right there? I don't know.
Yeah.
How do you...
Well, there's stuff that they cut out because they just thought it was tonally weird, which is fair. I mean, there's stuff that was in there that I just thought was funny.
Okay.
And I thought maybe it would lighten the tone a little bit. Yeah. And they're like, it kind of takes away from things. I was like,
there's still some humor in there, though. I mean, there's definitely parts that I laughed at. And
that's the weird thing. I mean, I did this thing, and people would read it, and they'd be like, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I'm like, whoa, what? I didn't know that things were so hard. And I'm like, I mean, they weren't, though. I mean, like, I'm happy, and
right.
And I thought it was way funnier than everybody else did. Yeah.
That's generally, it's funny how when you put something out as a creative person, the way people interpret it is never going to be exactly what you're feeling when you're making it. But that's part of the fun of it. It's also part of the nerves of it. But
yeah.
I thought a lot of it was funny. Obviously there's parts that weren't funny, but like I think one of the funniest parts to me was where I don't remember exactly which part of your life, time wise it was, but at one point you guys are all in a house together, and you're like watching a movie, and this woman walks in and she's like, "You guys watching that same fucking movie again?" and then I see work shed. I'm like, "Yep." Yeah. I was like, I know exactly what they're doing.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that, if you love the same things that I do, then you're hopefully going to get a chuckle out of some of it.
Man, that was definitely something I felt that I could relate to, was that, obviously very different lives in some ways, but I never, as someone who didn't fit in some social circles when I was younger, the horror movie with my three buddies was like the thing that kept me alive,
Yeah, absolutely.
There was something about it that was just enough of our thing that it felt special, it was cool.
Yeah, and that still continues today. The
Yeah.
horror community is like the still true oddballs.
Yeah.
Because you can't say that comics is oddballs anymore.
Well, it's so mainstream now.
Yeah.
There's so much of it that's mainstream. Like, I remember when I was in junior high and high school wearing a Star Wars shirt, I was kind of a loser, but now you can't get away from it.
I was just talking about my RoboCop t-shirt that I wore constantly in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And how it just wasn't cool.
Yeah.
It was not cool. If I wore it today, I'd probably get compliments on it.
For sure. It's weird how that works. I guess time changes a lot of things, right? That seems to be another thing that you show in the book, is like this, this thing, I guess, that when you hear it, it sounds obvious. I guess here's what I was thinking when I was reading a lot of it. I was thinking about how in my own life, and maybe that's the point of memoirs, is that you read them and you kind of think about yourself too.
Hopefully you process it and relate to,
Right. And so I was thinking about my own life, how there's all these things that throughout my younger years I quote knew, like on some sort of academic level. There's certain things that, I know that about life. Sure, yeah, you get older and things change, but then you get to a point where those things start to ring more and more true, and it's weird because you're not. You've changed obviously, and the thing's not any more true, but it's almost like your I don't know, your soul's ready for it or something. I don't know. Like it's weird that you can look back on some of your experiences and take lessons from it but you didn't know those lessons at the time, or a lot of times you didn't, or not you, but anybody.
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff in this book that I didn't realize until I was writing the dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
There's a page in there where we're fishing with my sister and my dad and myself, and we're fishing, and the dialogue on my planned page was completely different. The inner monologue was completely different, and I don't know what happened, but suddenly I realized, my old man was so similar to me that maybe that's what he was upset about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Not that I was a disappointment, but that he knew I was the same as him. And how would I feel if I saw the same struggles in my son as I had faced all my life? I'd probably he approached everything with anger,
right,
and that was how he did it. But that's also how I do things.
Yeah.
So.
God, that moment that people have when they see that, they see their parents in them, and for me, it's been happening now that I am raising a child. I'm seeing that, and that's like, I still don't know how to process it. You
Sure.
seem to have come a little further in that regard, but it's like, how do you square that? Because you might have all these feelings about your mom or your dad, or and then you think about your own kid and the feelings they're going to have, or not even your own kid, but the people in your life that you care about.
Yeah.
And what they see in you.
Yeah, so those things weren't, for the most part, they weren't things I thought about generally. And this book made me think about them.
Would you say, I'm curious, like when you were going through I don't know how quickly you said yes to them about doing it, but like if I was doing it, I would feel quite a bit of trepidation at first, and I would have to talk myself into it. And I imagine that I would land somewhere completely different than I thought I would once I kind of undertook the process. Did you feel like as you were going through it, did you feel like you reached a point where, I don't know, I'm curious about that struggle. Like as you go, because as you're drawing a comic, any comic, it's just like such an undertaking that so much changes. But I'm curious, like, did your sort of did you get disengaged at some point and be like, I don't want to fucking do this, man. I can't do this anymore. Like,
well, when I agreed to do it, they had a publishing date in mind already, and I had to meet that. And I said, yeah, okay, I can do that. And right at that time, I started working on The Crow versus Hack Slash with Tim. And I was like, yeah, I can do this. You know, I mean, as soon as I'm done, I could probably work on both of them at the same time. And then I was asked to do the colors on the Crow Hack Slash book. And I was like, oh, God, I think I can do this. And so that's when I started working on the iPad.
Yeah.
Because before everything I'd colored had been with, you know, a desktop and a mouse. So I was like, okay, if I'm going to get this done on time, I have to learn this thing.
Yeah, yeah.
So I learned it as I was coloring, and but that took up all my time because I was penciling, inking, and coloring. And it was 4 issues, and by the time I was done with that, I only had about 5 or 6 months to do Indio.
Yikes, man. You did that in 5 to 6 months?
Yeah.
That's nuts, man. That is nuts.
I think it was October I started, October, November, December, January, February. Yeah, it was about 6 months.
That's beast mode, man. I don't know if I could do that. That's crazy.
That it gave me no time to second guess anything.
Oh, yeah.
So anytime I'd be working on something and I'd start thinking about other people reading it, I'd freeze up.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, just do it for the publisher. Just do it for her. She's the only one that's going to see this page. And
that help a little bit, or
that's the only way I got through it, man.
Yeah,
you know, because there was stuff in there. I was like, oh my God, I don't want people to know this about me.
Well, that's another thing too. I think, you know, as someone who's only dipped a foot in sort of the personal type work, there is that fear, right? Of like, what will people think when they hear this? Now that you've done it, like, I mean, is that still a fear you have? Like, are you worried to talk about the book? Or do you think that, the other thing that I'm wondering is like, are you worried that like when you go to a convention again and somebody comes up and they're going to act like they know you because they read it? Or like, what do you...
Yeah, I haven't had the, you know, because it came out during a pandemic, I've not had any interaction with anybody that, where that might have happened. I have, of course, fantasized in my head about that happening, and what will I do? But it's been more awkward when people have been, because I've seen some friends now.
Yeah.
And they're like, hey, I read your book. I really liked it. And then in my head, I'm like, what do they think of me? Yeah. But, you know, it passes in a couple minutes. And I was like, oh, well, thanks. And I don't really open up a gate for further discussion on it. And then we just start hanging out again.
Right.
You know?
Right. Yeah, I've always, you know, that's, because yeah, I mean, I understand, like, I don't know if this is, I would assume this is you just from the things you've told me in life, but like, I'm not a very, like, I don't like to overshare, especially like, you know, to people I don't know.
Yeah.
So to think about sharing things, I mean, and I recently did a book that was a little more personal, and what I found that kind of amazed me, and it's didn't amaze me enough that I'm going to do it again right away, but I was like amazed at how much it didn't feel wrong to me. It felt, there's something you say at the end of your book actually that really rung true to me, and that was like this idea that you say something like, it's like, all of this has led to me sharing this with you, you know, and you're reading it, and now we're connected. And that's not a thing to be afraid of. It's not a thing to turn into some sort of personal thing necessarily. It's more like your experience is as much a part of everyone else as ours is, right? You're not, we're not islands, I guess. I don't know. Does that make any sense? Or like how?
Absolutely.
Because you say that line in there, and it's a great moment. It's a really great, almost a Malik kind of moment where everything just feels, oh yeah.
Yeah, well, that's I've often thought of the fact that reading is the closest that I could get to telepathy.
Yeah, yeah.
And being inside somebody else's head. And if you're guided through that by the person, it is like a guided tour of what I feel, and now you know me.
Right.
I mean, you don't know everything about me.
Sure.
I'm still really fucking mysterious.
You gotta be.
But it's like, as I was writing that, because that whole last page or so, that was a first draft, and I didn't change much of it other than some misspellings and stuff like that. But that was just free thinking. And I was like, okay, it's a giant run-on sentence, and fuck it. It feels like one last exhalation before this book is over, and it's the time to be the most honest.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I definitely feel like when I've read something, I feel connected to the person who created it in some way, which is why when people turn out to be shitheads, it's so difficult.
When you meet a creator and they turn out to be the worst, yeah.
I
hate that.
I don't look forward to disappointing people.
Yeah. I don't think they'll be disappointed.
I thought you were gonna be cool.
Yeah.
But or when somebody does something that you can't be cool with.
Right.
It's like, oh man, but I love this thing.
But at the same time, that's been all of us, right? Like we've all disappointed people. Right?
Oh, for sure. And I raised my hand at the head of the class.
Oh man.
Yeah, the other back to the editing thing. One thing that they did that was helpful to me was there were things that I had written, and my issue has always been that I assume the reader knows too much.
Mm-hmm.
That has always been my issue, or I don't care. I'm like, well, they'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Because they're smart.
Right.
And people have always told me, okay, no matter how smart they are, they're not going to figure this out because it's in your head. And
yeah.
So they helped out with that.
That's cool, like that outside perspective to tell you, dude, this is confusing.
Yeah, that's really the most helpful thing. And that came into play with certain aspects of my life that I was uncomfortable sharing because it wasn't just about me. It was about other people too, and I didn't want to talk. I didn't want to tell their stories. And
did you end up talking to anybody who you have in there to kind of say, hey, yo, I'm putting you in here. Does it bother you? Or
after the fact,
yeah,
for the most part, yeah. My good buddies, I talked to them.
Cool.
But yeah, there were some people in there. I was like, well, I hope they're okay with this, and I didn't lie about them, and I was trying not to be malicious toward anybody in it,
Well, I didn't get a sense of that for sure. I didn't get a sense that.
Yeah,
like I didn't hate anybody in there. I wasn't like, oh fuck that guy, man, that guy seems like a jerk.
Yeah, I don't. This wasn't my chance to get back at anybody.
Right.
That would have been the antithesis of what I was trying to do.
I've talked to some other friends who have done more autobio type stuff, and that was something that some of them have reached out to people and asked, and other ones haven't. And it seems like there's not a right answer. It's just a matter of like what the work actually is and where your comfort level is. And
if I was totally uncomfortable with talking about somebody, I just didn't talk about them.
That's probably a good way to do it.
The people that I do talk about, I think I was okay with that. But there are other people who just don't appear, and it might be a glaring omission to people that know me.
I saw that at the end there, and I was like, but that makes sense.
Yeah.
you're also telling a story here, right? I mean, it's not like a...
Yeah, and that's where the editor helped as well.
Yeah.
Because, just don't even bring that up.
Yeah, yeah.
Because we don't talk about it anywhere else, and it's really confusing now.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay. That's painful, but I trust you.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess at some point you have to accept that it isn't, it's not your life, right? It's a book about your life that's going to have some of your life in there and some of it's not going to be in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Got a Wolverine going over there?
Yeah, I don't know why I always draw this guy when I don't know what to draw.
I always draw Cable when I don't know what to draw.
Really?
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, we've all got those characters, right?
Yeah. Also, I've been rereading my Daredevils.
Oh, cool.
And that was a big influence on me, and he was just a guest star in one of them. And I was like, man, this is when Wolverine was cool.
Yeah, before he was... Well, it's like everything else we were just talking about is old school nerds. Like, well, now it's just watered down garbage, or whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever the thoughts are on it. But now, have you felt like... you've done work that seems like... that come out from, I guess I would say mainstream publishers, right? And then you've done some self-publishing, and you seem to be sort of... This is something I've talked to a few people about, too, because I feel like I'm somewhere between those things, does that ever... how's that manifest for you? Do you feel welcome at certain comic conventions because of your work, or unwelcome because of your work at certain conventions?
I remember going to a convention in the late 90s, maybe right at the end of the 90s, and being so frustrated because I went to the indie publishers and they said, your stuff is too mainstream looking. Mm-hmm. Then I went to the mainstream and I kept hearing it's too idiosyncratic. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, geez, I don't know. I guess and that's probably when I decided to publish my own stuff.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I never feel like I fit in anywhere. So
maybe that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah. I'm used to it at this point.
Yeah.
It's more shocking when I'm included in something.
Right.
Than when I'm not.
Right. Do you feel like... because you seem to engage with work, hey, you're reading some Daredevil, but you read Will Eisner. What kind of work... Is there a type of work that resonates with you more, or is it a matter of things you're nostalgic about versus things that you're sort of more intellectually engaged with? Like, how do you... what kind of stuff do you read and why, and does that influence the kind of work you make?
Well, I'll be honest with you here. I don't discriminate that much. Mm-hmm. I love watching Terrence Malick, but I also love watching Shaw Brothers kung fu films. Mm-hmm. I love films from the 40s. I love Sam Fuller and the noir, but I also love 80s horror.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's more baffling to me when people will only like one certain type of thing.
Yeah. And
so I'm the same way with my books. I've been going through some of the stuff I've collected over the years, and I have a huge run of Amazing Spider-Man right next to Reed Fleming, the world's toughest milkman.
Well, I see that. I think the reason I was thinking about that is that I feel like I see it in your work. I think the strongest kind of stuff I see in a lot of comics is the people who aren't maybe feeling such a myopic connection to a certain part of the medium.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree totally. And as you said before, those first guys that were doing comics, they weren't comic artists.
Right.
They wanted to be in the Saturday Evening Post or, do the Brandywine School stuff. And so they brought a different feel to it. Will Eisner, I think he was his dad was a set designer for plays. And that's what started him doing art. So it's like, I feel that the biggest thing I have issues with today is people who only read comics and only read the comics they like.
Yeah.
And that's all they bring is the knowledge of what somebody else has done in that medium.
Yeah. Yeah, you got to look outside for influences too. Like, I can tell that you watch film because you're doing things that obviously is not just comics type things to do. You know, not all comics storytelling solutions.
Yeah.
And I think that makes a huge difference in the work's ability not only to just be successful in general, but to like speak to different kinds of people. Which is the other thing I really enjoyed about Come Home Indio, is that it doesn't feel like, I mean, obviously I read comics, but I don't think it's inaccessible. I've actually talked to friends who, it's funny, I had a couple friends reach out to me and they're like, have you heard of this guy Jim Terry? I just read this book Come Home Indio. And I was like,
really?
Oh, really? Like, I was like, oh, Jim's great. Like, that's so cool. And like, they're not comics people, but they're like, oh, this seemed interesting to me. Like, this is the kind of thing I'm interested in reading about. And they had no trouble picking it up and following it. And, you know, I don't think a lot of people can pick up the newest issue of Thor and just enjoy it.
I mean,
or
I
even
can't.
get it. Yeah,
I can't. You know, that's I have stopped, unfortunately, reading the superhero stuff because I just don't understand it anymore.
Yeah. I will pick them up if my friends are drawing them, but I don't follow the stories as much as I used to. I'm sure there's good stuff out there. I'm sure there is.
I'm positive too, but I can't separate it all.
Right.
I think the last stuff I read religiously was the Brubaker Captain America stuff.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah. Which I love noir.
Makes sense.
And it kind of fits in that universe. I love Bucky.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You know the artist editions, I see you have the Kirby up there.
Yes, I also just got the Jim Lee X-Men one, which is amazing.
Okay. I have the Wally Wood, the Jack Davis, and the Will Eisner. Two of them were gifts.
Yeah.
But at any rate, you look at the Wally Wood one. Well, you look at the Eisner one, and it's pretty pristine. Mm-hmm. There's corrective fluid being used, you know, but for the most part, it's pretty there. It's pretty much there. Mm-hmm. You look at the Wally Wood, it is a pastiche of every possible method of working. Mm-hmm. And it is so meticulous that it's baffling to me. And I look at it and I think, I give up. I can't. The draftsmanship is so spot on. And it's that perfect draftsmanship meets cartooning. And it's perfection. And I think, my soul is crushed. You know, and then I got the Jack Davis one. And there is not a spot of corrected fluid in that book. It is all just straight to the page energy. Sure, the guy's arm is 7 feet long, but you don't care. And that's inspiring.
That's inspiring, yeah. No, I read you because, I mean, I have the Kirby one, which was a gift. And sometimes when I look at them, I get that feeling of when I look at them sometimes where it's so far... I still see it as so far above where I'll ever be. But then there's other parts of it where you do see, especially in the Kirby one, how messy it is, how immediate it is. And a lot of times that makes me feel a little freer to not be so locked in and zeroed in and just like, it's got to be perfect all the time. Because I guarantee when he was drawing New Gods, he wasn't sitting there thinking this line's got to be perfect. You know, he's just like, go. Right. And so it's that's kind of freeing in a way. Like, that, because I think that striving for perfection is probably, like not like, I think you say something about that in the book with the brush, with working with a brush. Yeah. It's like, you know, sometimes it's not necessarily about striving for perfection, but finding that groove with your tool or groove with the paper, and it feels like you're sort of just, you know, it's kind of flowing, you know, back and forth, and it doesn't always work. It doesn't always happen, but that's the goal. That's where I want to be. I don't necessarily anymore. Right. I don't want to be someone that can draft things perfectly, but I want that feeling from me through the tool onto the paper to be there. And when you were talking about that in the book, I was like, oh man, like that's like, I totally get that. You know, I totally get that.
And I think that's probably the reason I've abandoned the superhero stuff. I mean, I'm starting to see a little more cartooning now, but there is a good 10-year stretch where it was like photorealism is a way to go.
Right.
And that just seems like storyboarding to me.
Right.
And it was so uninteresting and it was pretty.
Right.
But it didn't inspire me in
cold.
any way.
It's cold.
Yeah.
You know, it's like when you see stuff like that, anybody can look at it and be impressed with the technical prowess.
Yeah.
But it's sort of like reading Calvin and Hobbes versus like reading Garfield. You know, like Calvin and Hobbes is so much more of a, you know, there's so much more emotion, there's so much more feeling going on.
Yeah.
Whereas Garfield, it's very precise and very mechanic. You know, he's got a factory making the comics for him.
Yeah.
And you can see that.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's like whenever I look at rights and stuff, even the Frankenstein, which is somewhere. Yeah, you've got it up there. The Frankenstein, where you're like, never in my life will I do anything like this, and yet, for me, it's like, but I kind of want to try, you know. And his thick blacks and the lighting and everything, you're just like, God, I want to be able to do that. I think I can almost get there.
It's like a siren call, you know.
Yeah, it's like I want to do this, and I think I can get close. And then you look at, you know, something else, and it's like, God, I can't do that.
It's interesting. I think that it sounds, in all of our conversations, but you know, and then reading the book and talking now, like your connection to comics seems to come from that sort of place more so than. And I'm not saying you're not a storyteller, you obviously are, but like, am I correct in assuming that it is a little bit more about the being at the desk, drawing on the paper, or yeah?
Yeah, I don't know if I think the storytelling is something that is very important to me, but I always trust that it's going to work out okay, and that maybe I'll surprise myself. And I don't concern myself too much with it. It's more about, especially nowadays, well, I should say especially after getting sober and getting a work ethic. It's more about sitting down and doing it, and the stuff will happen then,
right.
You know?
Right.
As long as you're working.
Right. Like if you're not working, nothing's going to happen.
Yeah, nothing's going to happen. And then you're just sitting somewhere talking about all the stuff you're going to do.
And that's so many people. I mean, that's a lot. That's most people. And there's nothing wrong with that. But like, you know, I've heard the similar thing about artists, like talking about other artists, about how fast they are, about how many pages. And I'm like, I heard some other artists say something to the effect of like, no one's really faster than anybody else. You're either at the table or you're not, and you know you're either working or you're not. Yeah. You know, and if you're doing the work, you're going to get it done quicker than the person who's not doing the work. You know?
Yeah, I like that.
So,
and you know what? There's a lot of people at shows. You know, they'll come up and say, "Man, I want to do that. How did you do it?" I'm always
the
like,
best question, right?
Yeah, and I'm always like, just do it, man.
Yep.
Just do it.
Yep.
Don't say you want to do it. Just do it.
Do you feel like that sort of okay? So that's another thing that's interesting to me about you know, making comics, but also your journey, you know, as described in the book, is like so much of what you're describing that I think a lot of people can relate to is feeling like, whether it be fear or like, you know, desiring some kind of change or, but anyway, I think, so the thing I was trying to say was that in the process of making, or in some of the things you're saying in Come Home Indio, and then what you were saying just now about you got to do it, there seems to be a lot that you're talking about there that I could relate to, and I think a lot of people could relate to, which is like, it's easy to see what you don't like about yourself, but a lot of us aren't willing to do the work to change it. I don't know if that is a thought that makes any sense, or if you thought about that in regards to, I don't know, because it seems to be part of like, you know, making comics, but it's also part of like, I mean, getting sober or deciding to make some sort of life change.
Yeah. Well, all the changes that I made was because I had no other choice.
You waited until you were forced to do it?
Yeah, I waited until the very last possible second before I died.
Yeah.
You know, and so I get it, you know, I get it. But once it came time to that, I was fully invested.
Yeah.
You know, and I like to say that I had a willingness at that time that I would never again have.
Mm-hmm.
But it was there when I needed it, just like Eisner's book, and so I have friends that think I don't think they've ever said this to me, but I can suss out that I probably strike them as a little new agey in some of my feelings, but I can only go off the experiences I've had.
Well, and it's weird how that has become a term people use in a negative way. I wonder how much of that has to do with the New Age movement, much like a lot of religions, being sort of co-opted for monetary gain by some people. But I don't know. I mean, you do have things in there that I think I could see why people might say that. I mean, to me, they read as true, and they ring. To me, it felt real to me. Like, it felt good for me to read those things and hear someone else putting them down on paper. But I don't know. Do you feel that came? How much of that do you think came from getting sober, and how much of that came from, do you think, exploring these issues of with family and with your background and those kind of things?
Yeah, I honestly don't know where one would end and another would begin.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always tried to be sometimes to my detriment, as sincere as possible. I did this. I'm working on this. I'm working on this fantasy book, Edge Bright and Leoflin. I've been working off and on it for probably 10 years now. And there's a point where I was pitching it, and the only way I could think to pitch it was, here is a sincere fantasy. And nobody wanted it, because it doesn't have a twist. It's not ironic. It's not inverting the genre in any way. It's just a sincere fantasy. And that is kind of exactly who I am, and I'm not saying that like, oh man, I'm the most honest, sincere person. No, I'm full of shit about a lot of stuff, but in expressing myself, it's come to my attention that I am not good at bullshitting.
Mm-hmm.
Because it just comes off as bullshit immediately. I have the worst poker face as well,
So memoir is the perfect thing for you to do.
Maybe the perfect or the worst thing for me to do.
Yeah. Man. So, you drew a lot of Come Home Indio digitally.
Yeah.
Which it still does not feel cold to me. I think a lot of times when people work solely on the iPad, it can work against them.
Yeah.
But I can see, right now you've got a brush out, you're on paper. Would you consider doing something totally digital again, or was that just you had to, or how connected are you? Like, how much of your process do you feel like is set in stone? How much do you experiment? Like, where are you at with your sort of procedure?
Well, for years, I was a diehard traditional artist,
mm-hmm.
But I'm old-fashioned in a lot of ways. I still buy physical media.
Mm-hmm.
One of my studio mates
mm-hmm.
is like, why are you buying DVDs? And there are movies I haven't seen yet. And I'm like, oh God, I really want to see this. Okay, it's $10. Yeah, I'll fork out for that.
Yeah.
And then it's a turd. It's a total turd, and I'm stuck with this movie. But that's just, I appreciate that. And it's what I like. And I like the process of seeing something created like this. And here's the thing, is that I honestly, not until I got the iPad and started drawing in Procreate, did I ever feel like it was human.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But once I did that, and I saw that it was just like drawing on paper,
mm-hmm.
then I was like, well, maybe I could do this. The trick is not to correct stuff.
Just let those mistakes are mistakes. Let the serendipity be there.
Yeah, and one thing that I do in my regular life is I always draw with a pen, or I always sketch with a pen. I never sketch with a pencil, because it's a sketch. It's supposed to look bad.
It's supposed to look bad.
And if I'm sitting there correcting it and erasing with a pencil, it's not a sketch anymore. So doing that, I began to learn how to correct my mistakes in the art and how to foresee what the line was going to look like before I put it down a little more. And so it wasn't, unless it was a glaring mistake, that took away from the art or was distracting, I didn't correct it. I just went ahead with it. And so I think that's what some people are calling a organic look, is just sloppy.
Sloppy. That's what people doing it would call it, right? But I think I understand what you're saying. I in my own stuff, like I've mentioned before, I have this tendency to want to make it all perfect, and I use a tons of whiteout. But I like the additive subtractive way that can be used, right?
Yeah.
But I think that it's weird to me every time I do something that feels sloppy, but people just connect to it. And that's another thing that's like, sometimes when you get out of your own head a little bit and you let people react, and you just sort of, you can see, like doing the Inktober was a big thing for me that really helped me to like, I forced myself to do whatever, a page every day. And some of the pages are like, I don't know what I'm doing. But
nobody's ever going to see this.
Right. Nobody noticed. They all liked it. Or not everybody, but no one was saying like, wow, it looks like you really phoned this one in.
Yeah.
Because there's so much stuff, I think, when you're making it that you're so entrenched in it that you're like, oh, if I don't fix this little nick right here, these people are going to be like, the people reading it are going to be like, oh, wow, that's unprofessional. And no one's going to notice it except for you.
Yeah. I've always been maybe lucky, you could call it, in that I've never been a perfectionist.
Man, what's that like?
It's it frees up a lot of time.
Oh man.
Like, this stuff isn't too precious to me.
I'm recovering. I'm still trying to get over it.
Yeah.
So are you
I don't envy guys that or people in general that struggle with that.
Yeah.
And I know that it's a struggle. I acknowledge the fact that it can be really debilitating to people.
I think what another thing that was coming out to me reading the book, and I don't hate to keep coming back to it. I mean, that's why we're here. But like, I think that
I appreciate talking about it.
Is that there's these things that we all have that they I don't want to say they hold us back, but they're there, and they're almost this. It's like this thing that's sort of a rudder on your life in a way that you feel like you're not in control of, whether that be your mental health issues, your issues with substance, your issues with your family, whatever it might be for any person.
Yeah. And
to have that moment that I feel like you have, shown us in the book, where you stop thinking that's who you are, and that it controls you and you don't control it, is a big moment, I think, for people that struggle with those things. And I say this as someone who's been recently going through some of those kind of realizations about myself. And I don't know if you, in the process of going through, your kind of sobering process, like was there a lot of reading about those kind of things? Was it more about the actual, how they say, doing the work? Because there's something about it that's very intellectually stimulating, but again, it comes down to like, what are you doing to kind of stop this thing from ruling you the way it used to? Whether it be alcohol, mental illness, whatever it might be.
Well, that's one of the eternal questions, I guess. And for me, it's always been, and not to just sound generic or old-fashioned or anything, but just doing the shit.
Yeah.
And in my case in particular, I have to take action. There's an old story that's, whatever, take it as you will, but it's like the three frogs are sitting on a log. Have you heard this?
No.
Three frogs are sitting on a log. One of them says, I'm going to jump in the water. So how many frogs were there?
2 frogs.
There's 3, because he just said he was going to do it. He didn't do it.
Oh, okay.
So nothing happened. He just said it, So it's like, For me, it has always been a case of taking the action. Because if I sit in my head, that is the worst place for me to be.
Same. But at the same time, I mean, it's this. There's a comfort to it. There's a comfort to not acting that I think a lot of people fall into. And like
Absolutely,
you said, you feel like maybe that you've been forced. You were forced. Like you had no options, right?
Yeah, I was at the end of my rope,
Yeah.
but hopefully not everybody has to get to that stage,
Right.
and but there is a point where it's like, well, I'm either going to do this or I'm going to be ruled by fear for the rest of my life.
Man. And that's
and it sounds like I'm saying that it's an obvious choice, but it's not.
It's not.
I mean, it's sometimes fear is easier.
It's really, I mean, and that's one of the things I think in this book that's just really powerful and really, again, like I think that, there's lots of things about the work that is really relevant here, but I think anybody can sort of start to relate to those kind of things. We might not all be from your exact background, but I don't think that matters. I think what matters is you've shared the way you've struggled through something in a way that, I don't know, the judgments on yourself are on yourself, and we can all relate to judging ourselves. And the situations are presented in a way where you have gone through them already. And so just by default, like the fact that you went through them and you're here, that's kind of hopeful, I think. There's a hope that's present in the work that I think is really, really fantastic.
Well, the only way that I got better was other people sharing what they had learned. If I didn't have those people who had sort of taken my hand and shown me how they did it, I wouldn't have figured it out on my own.
Yeah.
And I might not be here today.
Right.
And so I think it's important to be honest about those things. Not in a way where it's like, oh, well, I better tell the truth, but more like, this is what I did. This is how I got through. Because that's the only reason to tell a story like this. I'm not sitting here trying to sound cool when I say, like, I'm not a big, like, attention dude.
Yeah.
I don't need that. I mean, it's nice, and sometimes it's nice, and sure, I have my little, my fantasies. I mean, there's one in there where I'm on Conan O'Brien. Yeah.
I like that part. That was pretty good.
That was a reoccurring fantasy during my sad and lonely days. But the only reason to tell a story like this is to try and be helpful in some way.
I totally agree. I've been newly in therapy in my own life, and I think that one of the things that I realized pretty quickly was that just talking about the things that were in my head to somebody else made it better for me, and also then not just talking to them about it, but talking to other people about it, and getting that stuff out, because so much of it is like you feel like you're alone, and I get that in the book too. There's so much loneliness that you portray in it, and this feeling that you're alone. That's one of the things that also just makes whatever it is you're struggling with that much more paralyzing. And as soon as you realize you're not alone, and that other people are either struggling with it as much as you, or they've come further along than you in their struggle, man, it's like, what else are we here for, right? Like, why else are we all here on the planet together if that's not what we're doing?
I mean, if I'm doing my fantasy story, it's because I want to tell a story about these people who handle a certain type of situation well. And maybe there will be some inspiration in that, because I've gotten great amounts of, I mean, these last 4 years I've read Lord of the Rings once a year because it was a comfortable place and like inspiring to me. But so there's that kind of storytelling, but this kind of thing, it has to be as honest as possible, and I just feel like I'd feel like such an ass just talking. Already I felt like such an ass talking about myself for so long. I was so sick of drawing myself again.
Oh man.
I was like, I am so tired of myself.
Well, I guess we all got to get over ourselves, right? I mean, that's another part of it, is just to get over it, like live your life, change, do the things you want to do. I just feel like that's something that everybody can relate to. I think that, the hook for people here is that they're reading a story about someone of, mixed lineages that has struggled with, substance abuse. And those are all things that, are worth talking about. But personally, for me, reading it, I just felt a lot of connection with just my own struggles. And I think that that's the beauty of it, is that it's about struggle. It's not about, it's about all the other things too, right? But like, I think anybody can relate to something that's just like, life's really hard.
Yeah, it can be really
hard.
It
can be really hard, right?
Yeah, it can be really hard, but it can also be, even like the hard stuff, believe me, not to sound grandiose, but I wouldn't change any of it, because I kind of dig who I am now.
Mm-hmm.
And I really don't think I'd be anything like myself if those things hadn't gone on.
Yeah.
I didn't have to go through whatever I had to.
Yeah, man, it's life, I guess, right?
Yeah,
it's like, that's how it works, right?
We were talking about The Thin Red Line earlier. Have you read the book?
I have not. No.
James Jones was a surprising author, because he had all the generic earmarks of a Hemingway or a Norman Mailer.
Mm-hmm.
Tough guy, veteran, World War II. But there is such shocking honesty and sensitivity in his books that it really took me by surprise.
Did you read the book after you saw the movie?
Yeah, and then I read From Here to Eternity, because he wrote that as well.
Yeah, I've not read that either. I need to get on those, man. I really need to make that a priority.
Here's a crazy thing. After reading From Here to Eternity, which has some of the most profound passages about loneliness that I've ever read. And when I watched Thin Red Line, the movie again, he took sequences and lines from Here to Eternity. So that movie, the inner monologue, some of that was straight out of the other book. And it was like, wow, he's a scholar of this man, and so those books are well worth reading. But I picked up a book recently it was like a Time Life type thing, where James Jones had written the liner notes, and it was mostly photography of World War II, but he had also written a number of essays, and he talks about some crazy stuff. But one thing he talked about was the people who got wounded, and when they would come back, nobody wanted to really talk to them. And it wasn't because they didn't like them or didn't care about them. They were afraid that something would rub off of those guys onto them, and they might get wounded too. And that haunted me when I read that, because that's how I felt about loneliness.
Yeah.
And so that's where that comes in there in the book. This idea that, okay, I'm so isolated, I'm so lonely feeling. Nobody wants to be around that, because it's like a disease.
Yeah.
And they're worried they're gonna catch it. I don't want to hang out with that guy. He's a drag. I don't want to hang out with him just because he's a drag, but I don't want to become a drag too.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That's crazy, man.
And I think it's, some primordial reptilian brain thing,
Probably.
A herd instinct type of deal.
Probably.
But at the same time, we all feel that way at one point or another.
Yep. Yeah, everyone's had that feeling. Everyone's felt separate, and that whatever they're going through is so unique to them and so bad that they can't tell anybody about it. They can't do anything about it. They just have to
suffer alone.
Yeah.
And honestly, I don't want to talk too much about how or where I got sober, but one of the things that I learned in there was that whatever I had been through, somebody else had been through it before me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
No matter what I was going, you know, there's nothing that hasn't been done.
Yeah.
If you can think of it, somebody's done it.
Well, it goes back to that thing we were saying earlier about just this, and then what you say in the book about this connection between everybody through time, and like, I mean, you're right. I mean, someone's been through it.
Somebody's been through it, and they'll usually tell you about it, and they'll usually be laughing about it, and that immediately deflates all the gravity that you put into your own situation.
Yeah, yeah.
When you say, "Oh man, I did this," and they're like, "Oh, I did that too." "Oh man, this is what happened." And then you're like, and you're still here, you made it, and you're talking to me about it, and you're able to laugh about it now?
Yeah.
That's really hopeful.
Yeah. You can find out more about Jim's work by going to his website, woundedbutdangerous.com. You can find out more about the Chicago Alternative Comics Expo by going to cakechicago.com and liking and subscribing to our channel here on YouTube. Thanks.
Thank you so much for watching CAKEPOPS. CAKE is a volunteer-run nonprofit organization. Your tax-deductible support is vital to our financial stability and growth. If you'd like to learn more about CAKE or consider donating, you can do so at cakechicago.com.